Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome everyone to the Virtual Island Summit 2020 inaugural press conference. We have over a dozen journalists here from around the world who will be asking myself and our panelists a few questions. We have panelists representing the private, academic, and government sectors for different angles on some of the issues we're talking about this week. I'll just give a brief overview of the summit, and then I will ask each of our panelists to come forward. First, I'll ask Ambassador Young, and then Professor Brinklow, and then Anil Srivastava from Leclanché, and I'll introduce each of them fully as we go forward. So obviously you're here because you know about the Virtual Island Summit and you're interested to know more perhaps. And just so you have a bit of a backstory of how this event started, the Virtual Island Summit was started by Island Innovation and myself, James Ellsmoor. And from a personal perspective, after having the opportunity to work in the Pacific Islands and then for a while in the Caribbean, and then coming back to the UK and studying for a master's degree in island studies at the University of the Highlands and Islands in Scotland, I had the realization personally of how similar the issues being talked about in all of these different places are. I mean, it may be obvious that there are certain similarities between, say, the Caribbean and the Pacific, but coming to Scotland and realizing how similar the issues being talked about in the Scottish Islands was a real eye-opener for me. And being fortunate enough to be studying on a program where we were able to beam in people from all over the world to share their own experiences really gave me the realization of the opportunity here for using this technology to share information that will really benefit rural, remote, and island locations. And so the Virtual Island Summit started last year, really with that in mind as an opportunity to create a platform to share information between places that may, on the surface, seem quite different, but in reality have many of the same issues involved. And so last year we had 4,000 people from around the world participate, particularly well represented in the Caribbean and the US, I guess because of our own connections. And this year we've made a real effort to expand that to have more representation from the Pacific, from Africa and the Indian Ocean and the Arctic as well. The idea really is that by sharing information and sharing good practices and experiences, other places can benefit from that. And this is anecdotal, but we also have a Facebook group run by Island Innovation where people share information and stories and their own perspectives. And I remember a few months ago seeing a post that someone from Vanuatu had shared about a renewable energy project happening on their islands that was then commented on by someone in Jamaica who asked a question about how this could be applied to Jamaica, and then was further commented on by someone in Scotland who wanted to share their own project around from the Isle of Egg around the renewable energy projects that happened there. And I think this type of opportunity to share information using digital technology is really powerful. And in a much larger way this year, that's what we're trying to do with the Virtual Island Summit 2020. I can tell you now, we hit 9,000 signups for the summit today. And so I'm pretty confident by the end of the week that we'll have hit the 10,000 that we had predicted, because more and more people are signing up each day. It's completely free to attend. That to me is one of the most important things. I think that there are many of these, or there have been many of these conferences around the world on sustainable development that have been very expensive to fly to and access. And what I really wanted to make sure with this event was that regardless of whether you're a government minister or someone who is simply planting trees or mangroves on their islands to make a small difference, you had access to this information to share. And so that is a really important factor. And you'll see with our speaker lineup, we had this morning the Prime Minister of Fiji, the President of Micronesia, and the Governor of Guam talking. Right after this session, we have the President of Guyana and the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But throughout the week, we have local practitioners, business people, local government and mayors, and everyone in between. And so we really want to cast a wide net with that approach. I also want to say that we have an ambassadors program. So this year we launched a ambassadors program. We have over 150 island ambassadors from all over the world who have played a part in putting this together. And I really want to say thank you to all of them for the hard work that they've put in to help develop this program and bring this together and really ensure that we have that local connection. Sometimes a virtual event can seem quite distant, and so we wanted to have ambassadors on the ground in different countries to help make that local connection. So I'm just going to share briefly with you. 1 second. I'm going to share with you a video that was made by our ambassadors. May not work, but you can tell me if you're able to hear this.
When you think of Ireland, what do you see? We want to see an island.
By helping to unleash and share hidden jewels in innovation shining brightly from islands around the globe.
While physical distance once limited us, Island Innovation has created a digital platform that will bring us closer to people around the world, which we are excited to present to you.
You can think of the Virtual Island Summit 2020 as a bridge, a catalyst, to connect and to broker ideas, inventions, human resources, to promote sustainable development for islands.
This online event connects entrepreneurs, NGO leaders, industry experts, policymakers, and academics with the overarching aim to increase island prosperity,
enhancing development with various economic and social sectors, and helping to create sustainable islands.
Our online community makes it possible to connect 10,000 plus individuals living across the world
with professionals offering a range of expertise to collaborate and network to produce tangible solutions.
Join us in this wonderful movement to create a sustainable future.
Sign up to join the Virtual Island Summit at www.virtualislandsummit.com. I can't wait to see you there.
So there you go. I hope you could hear that okay. That was from our ambassadors, as I mentioned, who've put a lot of work into this. We had originally planned to have a series of physical hubs. So we'd had this idea of having physical events happening on islands around the world that would be coordinated by the ambassadors. Obviously, that hasn't happened this year. We actually do have one taking place on St. Helena, one of the most remote islands in the world that is fortunately COVID-free, and so they're able to have a physical gathering. But obviously, we didn't want to encourage that this year due to the risk of COVID. So we're not having any physical events this year, but we hope that next year we'll have these physical events, which could just be sessions being streamed into local community halls or community centers, right up to professional meetings or professional events, whatever makes sense locally. And so that's the plan for next year with the physical hub, so stay tuned. But obviously, we've kind of been proved right from the idea last year that there is an opportunity by going virtual. I do think that we will, obviously, this conference would not be possible in a physical format. And so we had wanted to have a virtual conference before all of the drama, to put it an understatement of the year maybe, this year happened. But we really see the opportunity in using the digital technology to connect everyone. So just briefly to show you the summit platform, for those of you who haven't logged in to Pathable, this is the main summit platform. Instead of having a series of Zoom links for the main session, we wanted to have a space that people could network, interact, reach out to each other. And so you'll see here, you can go to the agenda, scroll down. There's over 30 sessions happening this week. As an individual, you can click this plus button and add that to your own personal agenda because we're not expecting most people to attend all the sessions given how many there are. So people will go through, choose the sessions most relevant to them, tick that box, and then be updated automatically by them. You can also click on the People tab here, go to attendees and speakers, sort through them and see all the other attendees and speakers and learn from those. Finally, we have this virtual expo booth from our sponsors. As I mentioned, this event is completely free to participate in, and so we really rely on our sponsors to be able to put this on. And so, thank you to all of them that you can see here, including Leclanché, who is represented in this call, and you'll hear from shortly. And then finally, we do have this session called on Remo. Remo is a interactive networking software. This is the only paid part of the conference. So the Network Plus ticket does have a fee to go to. And this allows attendees to come and sit at a table, jump from table to table, interact with each other, and have try and at least recreate some of the networking that you would have at a physical conference where you can meet people and maybe have a drink at home while you Zoom with people from, well, not Zoom, Remo with people from all over the world. So that's a little tour of our platform. We'll now introduce our first speaker for her intervention. Ambassador Lois Young is the head of the Belize Mission to the United Nations and the chair of AOSIS, the Association of Small Island States. So, Ambassador Young.
Thank you, James, and good morning, everyone. So Belize is the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States for 2019 and 2020. And the Alliance is a coalition of 44 small island and low-lying coastal developing states, and they're known at the UN as SIDS. We lead on climate change issues, ocean conservation, and sustainable development. But we do more than simply amplify these marginalized voices, the voices of these small island and low-lying coastal developing countries. As a group, AOSIS was instrumental in shaping the outcomes of the Paris Agreement and ensuring a strong focus on SIDS in the context of that agreement. And we continue to work. We continue to try to hold the powerful countries accountable to their Paris obligations and ensuring that global emission pathways are consistent with reducing temperature rise well below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we continue our advocacy, and it's never ending. Conferences, negotiating groups, talks at conferences, advocacy continues. It's essential, I think it's essential that AOSIS participate in this virtual island summit. It's a natural extension of the important work that we do, because we know that the actual implementation of the Paris Agreement cannot be achieved by governments alone. And there has to be meaningful partnerships and synergies with the private sector and civic societies. And there are few global events that manage to facilitate this collaboration, as well as the virtual island summit. And this summit is unique. It's unique because it brings the perspectives from all islands, not just the SIDS. And you know, we're stronger together. And the lessons that we learn and we share in a forum such as this, which is dedicated solely to islands, is just invaluable. So it only makes sense that AOSIS should participate and play our part in this forum as well. I think everyone knows too that COVID has decimated our economies in the SIDS. Climate crisis waits on no one. And this new post-pandemic paradigm that we find ourselves in, it only complicates matters. With the collapse of our tourism industries, SIDS are sinking into debt. The global contraction is around 4.9%, but some of our countries, my country included, have seen a contraction of our GDP from between 8% to as much as 15%. And I want to say that Belize has a contraction of between 15 to 25%. So we have been calling for it at the United Nations and at every place that we could get our voice in. We need access to concessional financing. We need access to concessional financing enough to stay afloat. Because of the COVID, this is an opportunity. If you could see a silver lining with COVID, it's an opportunity to use the stimulus packages to recover green. There's no better opportunity for our stimulus packages to be tailored and directed towards a green recovery. And so we tackle both issues at once, the economic recovery and doing it in a green way. Governments need to submit their updated nationally determined contributions, their NDCs in 2020. You know, they need to work hard to prepare these new and updated NDCs with the stimulus packages in mind and the green recovery. It's part of a whole thread of actions that need to take place if we are to comply with the 1.5 degree report by the IPCC. You know, 2020 is a critical year. It starts that decade which is underway, where we have no time to waste. So countries need to do that, and AOSIS is trying hard we can't force them, but to encourage and stimulate countries to provide their new and updated NDCs in 2020. So at this forum, it's so wonderful. We're going to hear views from different islands on what they do to recover better, to make their packages more green. Tangible solutions will be put forward as to how we can jumpstart climate action, the climate action momentum, and in this very important, what I call a make or break year. This is a wonderful forum to listen to the whole time it runs and to learn lessons from each other. So I invite the world to participate. I hope we get 10,000. I hope we get more than 10,000. Thank you very much, James.
Thank you so much for those words, Ambassador Young. And actually, that's a really important point that I neglected in my introduction, that we have made an effort to include islands of all different political statuses, from independent states like are represented by AOSIS, but also what are known as SNIJs, subnational island jurisdictions, which nicely brings me on to our next speaker, Laurie Brinklow, who can maybe expand a little bit on that point and why it's important that somewhere like Prince Edward Island is represented in a conversation like this.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, James, and thanks. It's just, I'm incredibly honored to be asked here to say a few words today about all of this, including subnational island jurisdictions and Prince Edward Island. But I also wanted to chat a little bit about what island studies is all about, because some of you may be new to this whole idea of islands. And I just wanted to say why the Virtual Island Summit is such an incredible event in our world. So our institute here in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, has been in existence for 37 years now, when our founding director, Harry Baglow, had the vision to set up a research institute that explored the culture, environment, and economy of small islands. So even though you can safely say, once you've seen one island, you've seen one island, Harry sensed that islanders the world over ultimately had more in common than they had differences, echoing what James had said earlier. Indeed, the first International Islands Conference we hosted in 1992, called An Island Living, demonstrated exactly that. From the time I picked delegates up at the airport to the time I dropped them off 4 days later, they didn't stop talking. From that first conference grew several research programs and organizations and academic journals and networks, all of which study islands, or Nisology as it's come to be known, from all different disciplines like economics and economic development, politics and governance, literature and art, tourism, migration, ocean and environmental science, climate change, place and identity, and my favorite, which is islandness. Despite my experience of living in the North Atlantic being so radically different from someone in the South Pacific, we are all joined by water, the great connector. It's what we have in common. So we've come not only to think about islands and on islands, but we've come to think with them too. And thank you to John Gillis, a historian from Rutgers University, for coming up with that, thinking with islands. So the Virtual Island Summit is a tremendous opportunity for islanders the world over to connect with one another on issues that are top of mind. I look forward to sharing some of the work we're doing on issues of governance and sustainability here at the Institute through our UNESCO Chair in Island Studies and Sustainability in a session that starts in just a few hours. These are two areas of great importance to islanders here at home on Prince Edward Island and globally. We've come to learn that good governance is key to almost everything, especially for creating a sustainable future. And thinking about SNIDGES, which is what we are, coming under the huge country of Canada, how is life on a small island with our government below a federal government different from those islands, small island states out there? And is it better? Is it worse? Or is it just different? And what are some of the levers that we can use as SNIDGES to help create better sustainable futures? So that's the key of some of the work that we're doing here. I like to think back to when island studies was called seafaring and compare it with today's technology. As I said before, water binds us, but so too now does the internet. And at a time when physical travel has been curtailed due to the pandemic, we need events like this virtual island summit more than ever. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank James Ellsmoor, a great graduate in Island Studies, Masters from University of Highlands and Islands, and his team at Island Innovation for all the work they put into this event. And I thank all the sponsors and the speakers and the audience members who will contribute to the conversation. I see some students out there. I hope that we have some of our Master of Arts in Island Studies students joining us, as well as some of our professors and academics and policymakers and practitioners and just regular islanders, because that's who we all are. I look forward to the sessions and to catching up with friends and colleagues I wouldn't get to see otherwise. And if you're new to Island Studies, welcome to the family. So I'll just finish with a piece of poetry by Prince Edward Island poet Milton Acorn, who wrote about islands thus: growing up on one's good training for living in a country on a planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurie. That was wonderful. And our third speaker is representing Leclanché Energy Storage Solutions, joining us from Geneva, I believe, Anil.
Lausanne.
From Lausanne, apologies, my Swiss geography. It's not an island, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, an island among...
well, yeah, exactly. And Leclanché is one of our gold sponsors this year for the Virtual Island Summit. They were also a sponsor last year, where they showcased their project in St. Kitts and Nevis, a microgrid energy storage project. This year, it's quite a different angle on the electrification of transportation, which is going to be a really fascinating session. So, Anil, I'll hand over to you to say a little more about Leclanché.
Sure. Thank you, James. It's inspiring to hear the first two speakers. I would put more an industrial perspective. I see my participation as one of a call to action rather than just talk about things which may be done in future. First, by way of introduction, Leclanché has two primary businesses. We are headquartered in Switzerland. We focus on electrification of fleet vehicles, marine vessels. That's our specialty. And the second bit we do is using our energy management software, we build green power plants. During my session, I will elaborate more on it. But the purpose of really participating in this event is essentially to say that while we are living in pandemic, we have to focus on saving lives and livelihoods, but we cannot defocus on actions to be taken or should be taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I will share some of Leclanché's experience in what kind of projects we are delivering to contribute to reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. I won't take much time. I would rather take questions from the journalists who are on the call. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. And Anil will also be speaking at the opening session happening later today. And other representatives from Leclanché will be joining the panel as mentioned on the electrification of transport. I apologize, the sun is shining directly on me, which is why you can see slightly messed up background there. We have got one question that is submitted in advance from a journalist from Korovaka Uta from Radio New Zealand Pacific. And obviously, as it's the middle of the night for the Pacific now, we wanted to make sure they were represented. So I'm just going to play I'll have this background up while I'm playing it. You can just have a look at the sponsors who are joining the summit. And I guess while that's up, I'll briefly mention we have, as you can see here, like the three speakers represented today, sponsors from the public sector governments, including the Falkland Islands and St. Helena and Curacao. We have the private sector organizations, including Leclanché and Pathable and Buzzmaker and Ricardo Energy. And we have universities, University of Prince Edward Island, University of Delaware, and then also NGOs like the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and Island Institute. And so you can have a quick look there at the sponsors. And I will now play the question that has come in from Radio New Zealand.
Kia ora, malo lele. My name's Kuro Vakauta, news editor at RNZ Pacific. I have a question for some of the Pacific leaders. Basically, in this COVID-19 era, how do we balance battling the pandemic as well as building a sustainable future and addressing climate change resilience? How do we balance those priorities?
So I realize we don't have any leaders from the Pacific joining. I was just going to ask, perhaps Ambassador Young could start off on that one, talking about SIDS more generally.
James, this is Anil. Could you please repeat the question? It was difficult to hear. Maybe it just...
Oh, apologies, it didn't work. Let me try again. Let me just tell you if you're able to hear this.
Can you just paraphrase the question, please, James?
Yeah, I think that will be easier. A shame about that. Basically, the question was from a Pacific journalist asking, particularly in the Pacific context, how do we balance the needs for the response to COVID-19 immediately with some of the long-term context that has been the priorities that have been existing before, such as, for example, the priorities on climate change?
It's a good question, and that is the question that we have to work out very quickly. Some of the countries that I know about, I don't know if they're in the Pacific Islands or in the Caribbean, but for example, if there's a stimulus package coming in to help the tourism industry, hotels and tourist guides and everyone need to, or are looking at reassessing what it is we want to do with our tourism industry. Do we want to plow money into an industry that continues to import all the foods, the necessities, the food that tourists ask for? Do we want them trampling over our natural assets, or do we want to revamp the tourism industry so that we are more sustainable in the way we provide for tourists in the long term, less reliant on fossil fuels in the way we do things? Things like that we need to consider at this point. I agree that keeping COVID under control and taking care of the medical needs are almost like the most important thing right now. And so we need to keep that going, but at the same time, we still have to get our economies going again. And the tendency is probably to panic and just pour money into it. Let's start it up the same way it was. Let's get them going. But these are the things that we need to really bring all the sectors in and have a whole of government approach to what it is we want to do. I've heard some pretty good ideas coming out of Barbados. I hope that we have some contributions from Barbados in what ideas that they have for jumpstarting their economy that can be sustainable and long-term. But these are things that are going to come, I hope, at this summit here today.
Thank you. Anil, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I would like to echo and take the comments from Ambassador a step forward. We have to recover from the situation we are in. Health is the first priority. But as we take actions for economic recovery, the climate action, it could be right at the center. Let me give examples which is relevant to islands. Our own experience says up to 80% of power generation in islands can be decarbonized. Up to 80% of power generation in islands can be decarbonized. How about using the economic stimulus to create that opportunity? Okay, how this is a lifetime opportunity despite all the pain we are going through, to basically change our infrastructure, build or rebuild our infrastructure where climate action is at the center. I gave you an example of power. I can go on and talk about other technologies. That alone will create several thousands of jobs and create the economic stimulus we all need to recover from the pandemic we are in today.
Thank you. Laurie, anything else you'd like to add?
I've heard this, I think it was from Iceland very early on, where some tourism operators were talking about how this is giving them a reset button almost. What was mentioned at the very beginning, where tourism, you can think about what it is that you actually want and create it rather than reacting all the time. It's the same with social structures. Here in Canada, our government reacted very quickly with a social safety net that has helped every Canadian pretty nearly across from coast to coast to coast. And why did it take a pandemic to realize that, maybe we do need a basic guaranteed income, which is what in effect this was, that will help our society move forward. So I'm looking at it as more of a reset button, and let's take the time to create something that we want rather than what we've had to put up with just because it's been growing and growing and growing and we haven't been able to keep up. I see this in very simply in our health society, our health community here in Charlottetown. The hospital was kept very empty, but they had a very efficient way of doing testing that the doctors and nurses are saying we should be doing this all the time rather than spending so much money on our health care. Let's be a little bit more efficient and humane about how we're doing it. Just because of the way that they reacted to COVID-19, they've actually put new protocols in place, which I hope will continue and will be cost saving and make it better for everybody. So yeah, we're trying to look at the positives, and I think that we'll be able to come out of it much better societies, much better island societies.
Thank you for all of those answers. And I'd just like to remind the journalists that have joined, if you would like to ask a question, please, you can raise your hand. There's a button at the bottom of the participants list, and then we will call on you individually. And please make sure that you've renamed yourself to have your full name and organization showing in order for us to call on you. I'd just like to firstly call on Lisa Cornish from DevEx to ask a question.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lisa Cornish. Unlike our New Zealand colleague who just submitted a question, I am online well past midnight. So I'm just going to bag out our New Zealand colleague there. But I do have a question for Ambassador Young, kind of following on from that. Now, you mentioned in your talk, your introduction, that you're representing small island developing states, which you said were a marginalized voice, and you're putting forward the needs at the moment, including finance. Now, I'm just wondering, how is that going at the moment when we're facing a global pandemic? Countries worldwide are facing economic challenges and health crises. How is it going in terms of putting forward the voices of small island developing states? Are there challenges in getting heard at this particular time?
It's an uphill battle, I have to say that. Right now, as we are having this meeting here, this summit, there is one going on at the UN where ministers of finance are discussing what it is that countries need to have on the table to get out of this crisis that we're in economically. Everyone, everybody, every finance minister is invited. We had to carve out and make sure that voices of the finance ministers from SIBS could be heard, and that we put forward what it is. And what it is, it's concessional financing. The IMF and the ID and the World Bank, they have shareholders, and they are accountable to shareholders. They're not simply going to say, oh yes, just apply for a loan, you're going to get it at 1% or you're going to get a grant. They have to put parameters for it, and it is the hardest thing to do. It is the hardest thing to do. And I just came from listening, and it's still ongoing, and it's going to go on until 1:30, a little bit of what was being said. And there is a program, I think it's called the VBSI program for low-income countries, where their debt repayments have been suspended for a while till the end of 2020, and they're begging for that suspension to be suspended until the end of 2021. And then there's the call from SIDS, can we have that extended to middle-income countries as well? And that is like, it's they're listening, but it's not resonating at all, because middle-income countries are in the same plight as the low-income countries with our debt to GDP, which is overwhelming. So, and you know, it's understandable to a certain extent, because big donor countries have their own problems. But I have to say that this press for access to concessional financing and to debt relief has been ongoing before COVID struck. We have been asking for it for a long time, and asking the IFIs to please listen. We need to have it. You cannot judge us just on our, you've got to look at our vulnerabilities to decide whether we should have access to these kinds of funds. COVID has just magnified the problem and made it, and you know, I just wonder if maybe, having been asking for it for so long, they think that it's the same old, but it's not. We're actually close to default in our debt obligations in the SIDS. It's the hardest thing. The Secretary General of the United Nations is on our side, but he has the strength of his office, but he's not a shareholder of these IFIs. So to answer your question, it's hard. And I would say, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you want to talk about a little chink in the armor, we're probably at maybe a 2.5, little opening, maybe we can get there. 2.5, 3%, nothing more.
Thank you, Ambassador Young, for answering that question. I saw Megan Rowling from the Thomson Reuters Foundation. You had your hand up earlier. I'm not sure if you're here, able to come onto microphone.
Hi, James, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, great, thanks. So just to follow up then, in that case, for the ambassador, yes, I'm just wondering if you can elaborate, first of all, a little bit on where the blockages are in terms of providing this concessional financing that you say SIDS so desperately need, and what you think is required to overcome that. And secondly, how do you expect the COVID pandemic to impact on climate change efforts, whether it's mitigation or adaptation by small island developing states, because of the drop in GDP, hit to tourism, and so on? Do you see that there will be large ramifications and a setback for the efforts to tackle climate change of small island developing states? Thank you.
So let me answer the second question first. Remember that small island developing states are the least responsible for the climate change debacle that we're in. We are on the front lines of climate change, and yet we have had the least and continue to have the least to do with where we are now with climate change. So when it comes to mitigation, we don't have, our little mitigation is not going to make much difference. The big emitters have to continue to mitigate, and they must listen to the science and do the science. It will have an impact on adaptation, because you're talking adaptation is costly. You need money to adapt. So the fact that we don't have our national finances to put towards our adaptation needs is a problem. To answer the first question, which is where is the bottleneck? The bottleneck is in the countries that are the shareholders of the IFIs, the big countries, and there is a sort of underlying what is it? What a little underlying strain that I detect, which is that we can only help the low cost, the low income countries. We need to see more transparency where other countries are concerned. And the reality is that when you get funds from any of these institutions, you are audited, you're accountable for it. They cannot point to any funds coming through the IFIs that have not been applied to the projects that they're supposed to be applied to. So there's a little underlying strain that I detect below the surface. But really, it's the shareholders. And, you know, somebody just mentioned on that summit that's going on, finance ministers meeting that's going on at the UN, and we need a Marshall Plan for developing countries, the small island developing states. There should be a Marshall Plan, just as there was after World War II, when the UN emerged and when the IFIs were created. They are totally out of touch with reality and what is going on. They need systemic changes. And I guess, like with anything else, it's just a matter of, it's not just a matter. It is the same old thing. You have to talk and talk and talk and advocate and advocate and advocate. And I think that for SIDS, last thing I want to say is we need to have some big voices speak up for us. We need to have some big brothers, big sisters, a couple of them that will push for us in a meaningful way, because we are not in the league of the big countries on these institutions. We can do our best, but we need to have some big advocates speak up for us.
Thank you, Ambassador Young, for those words. I know there's a lot of interest in this topic, and particularly with the COP also being delayed this year. This throws some important questions in. I could see a question from David Mann from the Global Hong Kong. David, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, here's David from Hong Kong. I concern most about the pandemic problem because this is the issue we are now debating very much. And I think that the pandemic actually before the pandemic, there's already a trend of regionalization instead of globalization. But in the pandemic, it manifested this problem like a lot of disconnection between worlds like China and the US because of the arguments is intensified. So after this pandemic, what will the world patterns like? Is this collaboration or cooperation between different states will be more difficult because they have different policies instead of concern of one another's? So under this framework, how can collaboration between different states will be possible if we like different enterprises or citizens, they want to do much. However, their governments stop them to do so in the name of like the national interest. How can the people do if this summit wants to put emphasis on everyone's contribution, but we are limited by the governments or the international environments? So this is the greatest concern of mine. Thank you very much.
There's a lot of different aspects of that question, David. Very interesting one. And I think just briefly from me and from the idea of this summit, I mean, obviously, like anything, change brings opportunities and challenges. There's good things and bad things that come out of everything. And you know, a small example of that is we've been talking a lot about the benefits that that remote working can bring to rural and island communities, that people can work from home, people can move there and spend money. At the same time, that brings a challenge that we're seeing in some of the in some islands where within countries, for example, in Scotland, where now people are looking at buying up homes because they are able to work from home, and the house prices are shooting up, and then cost means that local people are not able to live there. Just a very minor example, but these kind of multiple changes that come through. To get back to your question about regionalization, I'll have to have a think about that one. And I saw Anil nodding along, so I'd be curious if you have any thoughts from a private sector perspective, Anil, on that question.
Sure. I think the question is very pertinent. I will not speak to the political aspects of it, but just speak about the industry aspect of it. It is absolutely clear that there will be a reorganization of the supply chain. Expecting more local, regional supply chain is a given outcome. Number of actions are being taken by the industry and by the policymakers and the policy incentives which are coming in. It is clear it will have an upside and a downside, but local supply chains would take priority, regional supply chains would take priority than trying to buy a small screw from far east, okay, when we can produce that in Europe. It is not, I'm not speaking in nationalistic sense, I'm speaking in the sense of climate change. Things which can be done here. If you look at the carbon footprint of building something in the Far East, which could be done here, if you account for it, maybe it should be done in Europe. Maybe it should be done closer home. That applies to every country, every region. I do believe the supply chain will be profoundly changed in the coming years because of the pandemic.
Thank you, Laurie. Yes, please.
Thanks for that very wide-ranging question. When you talked about China and US and various tensions that are coming, I find that working around the edges is something that we islanders seem to do extremely well. And one example of working around the edges is we've, through our UNESCO Chair in Island Studies and Sustainability here at University of Prince Edward Island, we've struck up a wonderful collaboration and friendship with the Office of Foreign Affairs on Hainan Island. And Hainan and Prince Edward Island are sister islands, and there have been lots of visits going back and forth. So over the past 3 years, we've been working on these global island reports. Here's an example of one that we did for 2018. We've just finished one for 2019 as well, looking at tourism on islands. And so taking some of those great ideas for economic development, like blockchain currency, or some of the free trade area ports in the South China Sea, those kinds of things, and having those conversations on the side and getting a lot of work done behind the scenes, so that, you know, maybe working, you know, paradiplomacy seems to be something that small islands are really, really good at. So I just throw that out as an example that it is not hopeless.
Thank you, Laurie. Ambassador Young, do you have anything you'd like to add to those points?
I think I understood what David was asking. He was saying, how can ordinary people contribute to helping to alleviate the ills of this global pandemic if their countries are stopping them? Is that what it is? Basically, what that you were asking. And if that's the question, I think then Laurie's answer is, right, you have to work around the edges and contributing to forums like this. It's no different from the way we are working at AOSIS, because we have to work from the edges in and take our little victories where we can get them. And listen, AOSIS has been working for the last 30 years. It started with the Malé Declaration in 1992. I have the date wrong because I can't add it, but we from the Malé Declaration started in the Maldives, where ministers got together. We've been working still since then to get our voices heard. So it's from around the edges that you get in until you finally make a breakthrough and people come to the realization. So I think that's what and forums like this are great, and there are lots of initiatives that will come out here.
Thank you, Ambassador Young. And I don't see any other questions, but if any other journalists would like to jump in, I'm welcome. We're happy to take questions about the summit itself and the format we're using, or also for specific panelists, which can be COVID or non-COVID related. I know it's difficult to get off that topic. Kayla Young from the Cayman Compass. Kayla, would you like to join join in?
Yeah, I just have a quick question about social media. Is there any hashtag that you're encouraging people to use on Twitter to connect?
Just hashtag Virtual Island Summit, or one word. Easy.
Perfect.
Thank you, Kayla. And actually, you'll see some, if you check out the hashtag, you can see a fantastic tweet this morning from the Fijian Prime Minister's account of him sitting in front of his laptop, a photo of him in front of his laptop joining into the summit, which is a great one, but it's quite an active hashtag if you want to check that. Thank you. I can see one hand that's been raised and it just says host 3000. So if that's you and you could rename your handle just so we know who you are before I call on you, that would be great. And I see Laurie Brinklow from La Voix Acadienne. Laurie, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I just had a quick question about the opposite challenges faced by islands. We are talking about climate change and social development, about growth and sustainability. And on PEI, we are facing erosion, sea level rise, but at the same time, we are congratulating ourselves when the number of cruise ships is increasing. So I'm wondering how we can move in every direction at the same time. And Laurie, perhaps you can answer this, but the two other panelists, I would be glad to have your views on that too.
Well, given the PEI connection, we'll go to Laurie first.
Oh my, Laurent, that's quite something, isn't it? In a small jurisdiction like ours, where we have 150,000 people, and people, we would think that we would be one cohesive island because we're so small, but of course we're not, because you do have so many competing interests against one another, and one being, yes, the growth of tourism, the growth of cruise ships, although we haven't had any this year, and oh my gosh, the harbor is so clean and it's so calm because we aren't getting those 3 and 4 cruise ships a day, and you can actually walk downtown and get a seat in a restaurant. But at the same time, you know, our businesses are feeling the pinch because they're not getting those tourists in. Although, as they say quite often, the amount of money that they spend is not as much as you would think, right? And the amount of money that, or the places, anyway, it's not necessarily the silver bullet. And people have to realize that perhaps, as we had said before, this is a time to reset our priorities and say, do we really need 85 cruise ships a year, or should we be spending more time, you know, making sure that we keep our island green and our water table at a good level, because we're refueling or re-watering the cruise ships when they're here. It's always a balance, isn't it? And trying to figure out the best way forward. And I don't have the magic answer, but I know that one of the things that we really appreciate here at the Institute of Island Studies are all of our connections and collaborations with other islands from around the world, and looking to see how they might be dealing with these issues. And it's a wonderful platform for sharing. You know, we don't need to learn lessons from huge countries because we don't have very much in common with them, but other islands that are like us, that may be a subnational island jurisdiction or even a small island state that are doing similar kinds of, facing similar kinds of issues, we might be able to learn from them. For instance, one of the things we're going to talk about at our session next, in the next couple hours, is a comparison between these SISs and SNIDGs. And so we're paired with St. Lucia in the Caribbean. And so we're taking a look at how people look and view sustainable development issues on our 2 islands, and trying to tease out some of the similarities and differences, and maybe take some of the lessons that we can learn from other places. I don't know, maybe the other people have, the other panelists have something to add to that, but that's what we keep doing. We keep trying to find these answers.
Thank you, Laurie. Anil, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I would like to. I assume, Laurent, one of your question behind the question, you have an issue with number of cruise ships increasing, is possibly related to the pollution it creates, in addition to other stress it will create on island system. I think the technology is here. In my panel, which will start in 4 minutes, for next 2 hours, I will elaborate on that. It is entirely possible today, based on the current technology, for all cruise ships which are docked in an island on a port can go all electric, silent, and create no pollutant, no sulfur dioxide, no CO2 emission. It is entirely possible to do that. We just need to have the will to do that. We are going on talking about COVID-19 situation. We'll talk forever. Let's take action now. It is a good time to make sure we put port regulation that every ship which is docked, cruise or otherwise, should go all electric, silent, and produce no pollution when it's docked. That is possible today to do that. We have built world's largest electric ferry, which is in operation for a year in Denmark. Tomorrow there will be a session, detailed session on that. I would invite all journalists, you, Laurent, to look at that and see if it can be done in Denmark. I believe it can be done anywhere in the world.
Thank you, Anil. I'm looking forward to that discussion. It's really interesting how some countries particularly have made advances with this electrification. And I think there's a huge opportunity for many of the islands participating to embrace this angle of electrification. We just have time for a few questions. So I'm going to take the final questions together and then go to each of the panelists one by one, and you can kind of give any answers you would like to those questions and any final statements you want to make as well. So Megan, if you just want to, Megan Rowling from Thomson Reuters, if you just want to share your question.
Yeah, very quickly. Thanks, James. So just to follow up for Ambassador Young, in terms of the request for concessional financing, have since put forward any kind of innovative ideas about what kind of projects and funding would be helpful, in the sense that, you know, is the money being asked for sustainable green projects, and if so, what kind of thing? And have you considered trying to propose things like debt for nature swaps, debt for climate swaps, that kind of thing, which may be you know, a little bit different from the traditional requests?
And we have two other questions that have come in, which are tourism-based questions. So it may not be the most appropriate for our panel, but Anil or Laurie or Lois, if you would like to take a stab at them, do feel free as well. One of those is, what is the state of readiness to receive visitors safely and comfortably for many island destinations, if you have any comments on that. And a second question from Dr. Wolfgang Alt from Germany has asked, what is the importance of Chinese tourism as a source market in the future of islands? And so we have three questions there, and if you don't feel like you have anything to add on those questions, any other final words that you'd like to add also. So Laurie, will go to you first, if that's okay, and then to Anil, and then we'll wrap up with Lois.
My only thing that I would have to contribute here is what our experience here in Prince Edward Island with receiving tourists safely. We've been able to open up to create a bubble of the 4 Atlantic provinces. So instead of just 150,000 people on Prince Edward Island, where we can all, you know, do our staycations and try and contribute to the economy that way, we've actually opened up to this one region. And I think that that is a really fantastic way of working together to create these kinds of bubbles where the incidence of COVID-19 is so low. If anybody coming in, if they do from outside the bubble, you'd have to quarantine for 14 days. And that's where these cases are being picked up. We had 4 just over the weekend, again, all related to international travel. And it's working really, really well for us. But I think that's the advantage of being an island. We have control over our borders in much tighter way than mainland places in other the rest of Canada does, because we have 3 points of entry and that's it, and everybody gets, you know, you have to submit a plan ahead of time. So these are the kinds of things that the islands have advantages over other places, and I think that this is something that we can be very proud of, and setting good examples for other places. So that's all I'll have to add. Thank you.
Actually, just a quick example of a travel bubble from this part of the world: the Isle of Man and the Bailiwick of Guernsey, 2 offshore Crown territories of the UK, opened up a travel bubble between the 2 of them to allow ease of access, as they were both COVID-free and remain COVID-free so far. So that has been a policy by several islands. I know the plans for that policy in the Pacific were unfortunately dashed so far with the new uprise of cases in New Zealand. Anil?
Sure. I don't have a particular answer to the questions you listed out, but my closing comments for the conference would be what I started off with. It is a call to action. We can put climate at the center of economic recovery, which needs to be done after the pandemic. It could be rebuilding or building new infrastructure, which is climate resistant, climate resilient. To give examples of that, what kind of material we could use to build homes, the roads, the electricity network, the transport network, how do we heat, how do we cool? It's time to start Industrial Revolution 2, and this is our lifetime opportunity. If not, in generations we haven't had that. It's time to do so.
Thank you, Anil. Ambassador Young, for your final remarks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, James. So there is a SIDS statement on debt. That is a UN document that came out in the last 2 months. I don't have it here in front of me, but it's a United Nations official document. It's negotiated by the AOSIS, the members of the AOSIS group, and it sets out what we need to have done in regard to our debt situation. So I don't know, I can ask James how to get it out, but it's a UN document. Specifically too, we have heard from ECLAC, which is the organization, the regional organization for the Caribbean, and Alicia Barcena is the executive director. She has been putting forward the idea of a Caribbean Resilience Fund. And she just put it forward again today at the Ministers of Finance meeting. And it's a fund where our payments toward our debts go, private and public, go into this resilience fund. And then there's an architecture and a structure for how the funds are used. So that was one suggestion that she had. Another suggestion that came out from Costa Rica is that then we need to have a fund for emerging and poor countries. And Costa Rica's Minister of Finance had suggested that it could be a fund that starts up with $1 trillion. And the $1 trillion could come from the ODA that was agreed on, that developed countries would give to developing countries. And if that were to happen, and that ODA was put into this $1 trillion poor country fund, it would equal 3% of the GDP of developed countries. Just 3% if that were to happen. So that's another suggestion that came forward. And then we had the same kind of suggestion. These all have the same genre underneath of them. Came out of a group from the African continent, UNICA, and the executive director suggested a debt liquidity fund. So these are the suggestions that are coming forward for the addressing of our debt situation. At the end of today's meeting, I think there'll be a synopsis of what has come out, and it will be taken forward to a heads of government meeting on the 28th of September, I think it is. This is Ministers of Finance, and it'll go to the heads of government, and we'll see what comes out of it. But for documentary proof and analysis of what we want, look at the SIDS debt statement, or it's called the AOSIS debt statement, I think. Not the SIDS debt statement, I'm not sure, but it's a UN document. On the question of tourism, I want to just support what...
I can just give you 1 minute.
No, that's okay. I don't have to say it. I just want to say that, you know, cruise tourism is, I mean, I know people like it and it's good business and it creates a lot of jobs, but for us in developing countries, it gives us very little, hardly worth it when you compare that to the damage to our natural resources and the dropping of the brown water just outside our territorial waters. You know, it's not good. It's not good for us.
Yeah, it will certainly be interesting to see the future of the cruise industry and how that changes, I'm sure, beyond the recognition of what we have been used to. Well, with that, I'll say thank you to our three speakers for their interesting interventions. Thank you to all of the journalists and the attendees who have joined to watch, and for all the questions that have come in. In just a few minutes, in around 20 minutes, we'll be starting our opening ceremonies with opening speeches from several dignitaries from particularly from the Caribbean, but from other regions as well. And of course, Anil Srivastava's full intervention will be in that panel also. So I'll end this call now, and we hope to see you all in a few minutes for that opening ceremony. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Goodbye.